You're on board the NewsTrack. A lot of the global conversation this week has been about a Chinese AI firm which has come out with a breakthrough new technology called DeepSeek, which is causing a tumult in the global financial markets, particularly in the overpriced tech companies in the United States. This breakthrough technology, which this Chinese company has come out at extremely low prices, also upends all fundamental assumptions about AI research, about how much it would cost to power these AI models. The critical question for India, of course, is the impact that DeepSeek can have on the Indian tech and AI ecosystem. A while from now, I'll be joined by two top global experts who talk about sovereign AI and the need for India to try and ensure that its AI game is one step ahead of competition at a time when it's American and Chinese companies who seem to be coming out with the breakthrough technology. So what should Indian companies do? We look at that on the other side of this report.
DeepSeek. It's all what everyone is talking about. The Chinese startup is shaking up the AI universe. Its new generation of AI models are competing with the ones developed by US big tech, but at a fraction of the cost. Even the US president has taken note.
Today and over the last couple of days, I've been reading about China and some of the companies in China, one in particular, coming up with a faster method of AI and much less expensive method. And that's good because you don't have to spend this much money. I view that as a positive, as an asset. So
DeepSeek claims to have spent around $3.5 million to train its V3 model, delivering the same results that took Google, OpenAI, Meta and others hundreds of millions of dollars to achieve. According to Epoch AI, Google and OpenAI spent around $70 million to $100 million in 2023 to train Gemini 1.0 Ultra and GPT-4 frontier models.
This is very unusual when you hear a DeepSeek, when you hear somebody come up with something. We always have the ideas, we're always first. So I would say that's a positive. That could be very much a positive development. So instead of spending billions and billions, you'll spend less and you'll come up with, hopefully, the same solution.
Analysts are calling it a tipping point of AI economics.
This really goes to show that necessity is the mother of invention, as the old saying goes. Is they don't necessarily have the tens of billions of dollars that some of these companies in the US have, and they wanted to compete. They had perhaps a better algorithm, a better idea about how to train the models, and then also how to execute on it for answering people's questions. And they are using a slightly different technique, which is apparently, based on the data so far, a lot more energy efficient and efficient in terms of the chips that it might take as well. They were able to really do this on what some people would call a shoestring budget.
But there are apprehensions too. DeepSeek CEO and founder Liang Wenfeng is a billionaire who runs a hedge fund. These images of him meeting with Chinese Premier Li Qiang on 20th January have fueled concerns about the tech company's proximity with the Chinese government, putting the spotlight on data sharing. Bureau Report, India Today.
Chinese AI technology, DeepSeek, sending shockwaves across the world. Stocks of top tech companies in the United States and elsewhere tanking, and fundamental questions about artificial intelligence really being upended through the prowess that this Chinese AI company has demonstrated. To talk about the implications of DeepSeek in an Indian context, we're joined at this time by a top AI expert from the MIT labs in Boston in the United States. I want to welcome Professor Ramesh Raskar. He's at the MIT Media Lab, an expert on AI and machine learning. We're also joined by Tanvi Ratna, founder and chief executive officer of Policy 4.0. It's a research foundation that works closely on the AI space in India. I want to go across to Professor Raskar first. Given how savvy tech companies are supposed to be, what shocks me the most is just how surprised all tech companies, stock market operators have been by the technological prowess demonstrated by DeepSeek. How is it that the Chinese AI company was working on this technology, was on the verge of this massive breakthrough, and that nobody seemed to know about it?
Rahul, that's a great question. I mean, if you separate the stock reaction to, the reality of AI progress, I think what's amazing is that many of us, for the last year or two have been talking about the fact that the bigger is better mantra may not be the way to go. And the main breakthrough in these new types of models, which is reasoning, which is instead of creating one continuous way of thinking about AI, can you create multiple components, as they call mixture of experts, that talk to each other and figure out the right solution amongst them, and then do some kind of a chain of thought thinking, some kind of a reasoning to get to the right solution. So it's just like meeting a student and asking for the first time. You may not get a right answer, but if you kind of nudge them and put two students together, you might actually get a very, very good answer. So this technology has been evolving over the last couple of years, and we have been noticing that actually some of the Chinese models are doing reasonably well in that arena. So I think from a scientific research point of view, I think a lot of people saw it coming. I think the reaction in the stock market, is difficult to predict. But for a lot of time, everybody has been worried that there has been overinvestment in sectors which I call core AI, which is chips, foundation models, and cloud services. And maybe the reckoning has come that there has been an overinvestment in those areas.
Professor Raskar, the critical question, of course, is the impact that DeepSeek is likely to have in the Indian context. Earlier, all Indian tech companies and the world at large was dependent largely on American technology, whether it's OpenAI, whether it's the Google large language model or Meta's Llama. Now you've got the Chinese coming in, which is great for China, it's great for Chinese AI and tech companies. But what do you really think this means for Indian AI and for India as a people and state?
I think it's a great news for anybody in a developing country or a startup or somebody who doesn't have too many resources, because what this trend has shown for quite some time now is that instead of creating one large model, which is called kind of a training time compute, it's actually better to do an inference time compute, which is also kind of test time compute. When you actually use it, you use more compute as opposed to when you train it. And that has really come through in a very, very predictable way. So this is a great opportunity. A lot of research I do at MIT in Boston is called decentralized AI. And this notion of decentralization of compute and talent and resources is actually great news for Indian startups and also Indian companies who can now say, you know what, let me just use these smaller models with test time compute, and I can actually get extremely high quality results. And as you start going into more sectoral aspects, AI for healthcare, AI for legal, AI for manufacturing, clearly you don't need these extremely large models. So this actually continues to be a great news for smaller players.
Tanvi, Ratna, the question, of course, which is something that all of us need to introspect very hard on, is that why did this breakthrough happen in China and not in India? China has supposedly more controls on its tech and AI companies. India supposedly has a more open and transparent tech ecosystem. And this is really about questioning principles or questioning beliefs in terms of how AI models are supposed to work. The Chinese just deconstructed the whole thing, refused to go by old beliefs and reimagined how these models should be powered and how they should come together. Why did it happen in China? Why did it not happen in India? What does it say about them? What does it say about the current status of our AI play?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Rahul, and thanks for having me. I think in terms of if you look at the US, India, China sort of triangle in this whole play, China in as early as 2017 had this new generation AI development plan around 200 billion and over that, which they invested over like 3 years or so. And I'm including that right now they have also launched a 137 billion sort of plan. So in total, they have already thrown about 200 billion into the ecosystem for AI. And if you see, China actually has a pretty robust ecosystem around AI. So whether it's talent or it's capital, you have OEMs like Alibaba. Alibaba had the Quen model, which was also considered good, but it has, of course, been outpaced a lot by American tech. I think, the interesting thing, I think, is that there was this ecosystem of talent, capital, and there was an entrepreneur just willing to take that risk, who was the founder of DeepSeek, and he was willing to take that risk, throw the money onto this, and run that experiment. And you see the same thing that happened in the US as well, where Elon Musk fronted the money for OpenAI. And then OpenAI sort of brought in this new class of, Gen AI. And I think what we are missing, what India needs to do really is to, there needs to be some risk taking. There needs to be someone ready to take that risk. I think right now there's a lot of focus on the policy direction and, what strategy the government will take. And I think that will help, but I think it doesn't need the government. It's also private, private capital, private talent, who's going to step up and really lead that push.
The question, of course, from an Indian perspective is, which AI model should Indian companies be building their use cases on? India, in several ways, emerging as the use case capital of the world, while the American proprietary AI models are far more expensive to use and the Chinese models are cheaper. But we've also seen how the Chinese censorship plays a big role in what DeepSeek, for example, can throw up. You ask him about which states. First, he says Arunachal Pradesh is an Indian state. You query the same thing again, and after a while, he says, no, I can't answer that question. So if it's China's large language model with all Chinese censorship that's throwing up these results, how safe and wise is it for Indians to start using DeepSeek as a tool and for Indian companies to build applications based on the DeepSeek technology?
Yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about.
It is an open source model.
Professor Raskar.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about the censorship, because censorship is coming through the way the model is trained. And because those models are open source, anybody in India can retrain the model and remove some of those guardrails and so on. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. In fact, these models are already available on Hugging Face, so your data doesn't go to China, and you can use that in an open source manner. So in that sense, I think it's really a level playing field for anybody to build on top of this, just the way Meta has created the Llama models, and people are able to build on top of that. In fact, the DeepSeek goes one step beyond that because it's open source. And I would say this is also a reminder that it's not necessary to build foundation models to make progress in a country. What I like to call is kind of the core AI versus the applied AI. And I think India is going to do much better in the applied AI world. Taking existing models and tune them, apply to specific application scenarios like agriculture and health and manufacturing and so on, and also create new data pipes. So
no, but I don't understand this. And I must ask you the same question I asked Tanvi, that why is it that core breakthrough doesn't happen in India? Once somebody's discovered the fundamental model, using it smartly, building on it is something that Indian tech companies seem good at. But despite the likes of the TCS and the Infosys, the HCLs, the Tech Mahindras, and this mammoth of engineering capabilities, technological prowess, even resources which are available, that core research somehow doesn't seem to happen in these Indian companies or even the startups.
One would argue that it's not necessary because, I think in terms of, if you want to have research bragging rights, yes, it's important to spend billions of dollars and get that flag and so on. But I don't think it's necessary for every country. I mean, I don't think Spain and Brazil and other developed countries wake up and say, why don't we have our own model? I don't think it's that important. I think what's more important is what you do with it. And I think the Indian industry is highly attuned to making the best of it. So I wouldn't worry too much about the bragging rights. I call this kind of the CDAC moment, if you remember from the 1980s, when because of chip exports from the US in Pune, the Center for Large Computing was set up. And that created a whole wave of new computing paradigms in India. And I think it's a similar moment for the Chinese. Some people are calling it the Sputnik moment. For India, I would call it the CDAC moment. And I think this is a great news. I wouldn't worry too much about the bragging rights. I do agree with the notion that there should be no dependency in terms of censorship and who can use it, who cannot use it. But that's not the challenge with DeepSeek. There is a possibility that if China continues to pour hundreds of billions of dollars, they will continue to dominate. But there's not much you can do about it unless you incentivize the system to change the DBT and DST and other research organization to start putting billions of dollars, which, in my humble opinion, is not
Tanvi,
necessary.
the attention this week has been on the stock market crash in the United States, the hit, the billions of dollars of hit that American IT companies have taken. But if we move aside from that notional loss of billionaire money, the critical question really is what impact does this have going forward? All the fundamental calculations about how much these GPUs would cost, how much it would cost to power these AI models, those are now appended. So how are American companies, in your view, likely to react, and how does that impact AI research going forward?
Yeah, so I think in terms of the edge that American companies have, I don't think DeepSeek erodes that totally, because DeepSeek was also, it's not actually 5 million, right? Because it's trained on this V3 model, and it's likely that that's trained using an open source like Llama or things like that. And also, once DeepSeek gets those customers, once you build a model, the real race is for users, right? And that's where all the models are competing right now. That's where American companies have a big edge. And I think the real challenge is, like, even if DeepSeek gets a lot of users, it actually does not have access to those high value chips to really scale servicing those users at the speed and at the rate at which OpenAI or other companies can. So I think that's where the U.S. approach of having sort of these sanctions on chips, it is actually going to work in the long term, because you do need to scale the AI offering as well. And I would actually come back to your previous question. I do think it is. The real race is for AGI. It's not even for applications, because, a lot of applications can be replaced by agentic, SaaS, vertical AI sort of plays, right? So the real race is for AGI. And I think India, with the stature and the competence that it has, I don't think it should take itself out of the race for that. And I think with the founder of Perplexity recently, if he has been pushing for India to do something like DeepSeek. He's ready to put money and time to make that happen. I think we just need that one person to sort of light that spark and just kickstart that real innovation, because I think we are now in the race globally where we need real innovation. It's not just going to be...
Last question, Mr. Raskar. American IT companies are panicking. The stock market is panicking because it questions the high price earning multiples that these tech companies were enjoying. But the real critical question is, how does this impact AI research going forward? The stock market valuations will get corrected, but will this actually lead to a reduction in the amount that consumers need to pay, for example, for using these AI models, that companies need to pay to build on these AI models? How does this impact AI development and research going forward in your view?
Yeah, that's a great question, because as we just heard, APIs are critical, and the DeepSeek APIs are about 20 times cheaper than OpenAI APIs, which is good news for everybody, because clearly the money will not be made just by DeepSeek, but any cloud provider that provides DeepSeek models will also be able to reap into that revenue. In terms of investments, and if you think about the stack, everybody thinks that the previous generation of innovation is more fundamental than the current innovation. So Google would think Cisco is more fundamental because they provide the internet, and Facebook will think Google is more important because they provide the search infrastructure and so on. So I don't think we should take any particular generation and say that's the most fundamental thing. What comes later always appends what has been done before. So I would continue to say that the right move for companies in India is to immediately start creating frameworks for applied AI. I was on the national policy for NITI for AI in India. And even back then, we thought about, how can we really stimulate the applied AI research as opposed to foundational research, foundational model research. And in applied AI, there are many problems to solve. So if you want to solve healthcare today, for example, we need a decentralized AI stack for healthcare, where pharmacies and insurance companies and hospitals can all talk to each other with their own AIs. And that's going to require some other breakthroughs. And in fact, the nonprofit we started recently in India called B79.org, B79, B for Bharat, 79 for, the longitude for the 5 Jyotirlingas. I think the B79 is kind of the open AI for applied AI in India. And we hope, as we heard before, you need a few people in the country to start realizing that, hey, there's this whole new set of research we can do now, whole new set of innovation that's going to have a much bigger impact than going backwards in time and trying to have research on foundation models.
Professor Ramesh, Raskar, Tanvi, Ratna, thank you for joining us. Sovereign AI is something clearly all countries need to think very deeply about in terms of how their AI models work, what build happens internally, what's brought in from the outside. For joining us on this broadcast and sharing your thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
This
you.
is where